In the summer of 1995, if you walked past a bus stop or a movie theater, you would most likely have encountered a face. It was not a polished face, nor was it handsome in the traditional Hollywood way. It was the face of a 17-year-old kid, smirking, arrogant, and terrifyingly real. It was the poster for a film called Kids, and this face belonged to a character named Telly. Telly was a monster, but the boy who played him, Leo Fitzpatrick, was not an actor, just a 15-year-old skateboarder accidentally pulled in. While the curse of kids drowned his co-stars in tragedy, Leo survived. Hidden behind the public image was a ghost desperately hiding in the contemporary art world, carrying the survivor's guilt after his friends passed away one by one. This is the story of his 30-year journey, a quiet struggle to escape that character's shadow and build a life that was entirely his own. York City in the early 1990s. This wasn't the tourist-friendly metropolis of Friends or Seinfeld, but the last gasp of an old dangerous city emerging from the crack epidemic with a near-record murder rate. Hovering over everything was the shadow of AIDS, which by 1994 was the leading cause of death for Americans aged 25 to 44. And among the city's youth, there was a terrifying fatalistic apathy, a sense of invincibility that was the era's central terrifying theme. Into this volatile cauldron came two artists. The first was Larry Clark, a 50-something photographer, legendary and reviled for his raw, intimate photos of self-destructive youth. He wanted to make a film about this new generation, but as an outsider, he didn't know their language. The second was Harmony Korine, a 19-year-old skate prodigy and high school dropout, who was this generation, spending his days absorbing the scene. The two met at the epicenter of this world, Washington Square Park, a concrete ecosystem where skaters, artists, runaways, and drug dealers all collided. Clark, who had been photographing the skaters, told Korine his film idea. Korine, with teenage confidence, essentially replied, "I know how these kids talk. I can write that." According to legend, he banged out the entire brutally authentic script for Kids in just 3 weeks. Clark knew this was it. The script was a raw, profane, and perfect document of the world he wanted to capture. But they wouldn't go to acting agencies. To find their cast, to find their Telly, they went right back to the park. They were casting for reality. And that is where they found Leo Fitzpatrick. This encounter in a park filled with thousands of kids was a moment of pure, random chance that would reroute an entire life. To understand the explosion that was to come, one must first understand the boy who was standing at ground zero. He was not Telly. He was not a predator, nor was he an actor. He was a 15-year-old suburban kid with a shy disposition, who was about to be offered an impossible, life-altering, and monstrous bargain. Leo Fitzpatrick was born on August 10, 1978, in West Orange, New Jersey. This fact is perhaps the most crucial and most overlooked piece of the entire kid's puzzle. He was not a New York City kid. He was not a runaway, not a squatter, not a product of the city's grinding, chaotic foster care system. He was a suburbanite from a normal, stable, middle-class family of Irish and English descent. Like countless teenagers from the surrounding tri-state area, he was drawn to the magnetic, rebellious, and dangerous energy of Manhattan. His passion, his passport, and his entire identity was skateboarding. For Leo, skating wasn't a sport. It was an identity. It was a subculture, a language, and a reason to exist. It was his reason to save up his allowance, hop on a New Jersey transit train, and ride the rattling cars into Penn Station, from where he would skate downtown to the Mecca for every East Coast skater, Washington Square Park. He was a good skater, good enough to be a part of the loose-knit, fiercely local crew that included kids who would become legends, like the impossibly charismatic Harold Hunter and the troubled, magnetic Justin Pierce. In the summer of 1994, he was just 15 years old. He was spending his days doing what teenagers do, hanging out, skating, talking trash, smoking cigarettes, and trying to avoid trouble. He was not an actor. He had no desire to be an actor. In interviews, he describes himself at that time as fundamentally shy, a bit of an observer, more comfortable on the periphery than at the center. One day in the park, Larry Clark, this strange, wiry older guy who was always hanging around with a camera, approached him. Clark had been observing this scene for months, a 50-year-old man studying a pack of 16-year-old wolves looking for his way in. He was casting his movie and he saw something in Leo. He saw the face. He saw the look. He didn't see a performer. He saw a subject. He asked him to be in it. This casting process was in itself an act of cultural curation. Clark and Corrine weren't looking for people who could play their characters. They were looking for people who were their characters, or at least who could be easily molded into them. They were pulling kids directly off the street and slotting them into the script. They found Chloe Sevigny, a beautiful, effortlessly cool 19-year-old from Darien, Connecticut, who was interning at the iconic Sassy magazine. She was the scene's undisputed it girl, though that term had yet to be properly coined. They found Rosario Dawson, a stunning 15-year-old with no acting experience, literally just sitting on the stoop of her squat in the East Village. They found Harold Hunter, the gap-toothed, wild-laughing soul of the park, and cast him essentially as himself. And they found Justin Pierce, another young skater whose magnetic smile couldn't quite hide the chaotic, troubled energy that pulsed beneath his skin. And they found Leo. Here, however, is the critical, often forgotten fulcrum on which Leo Fitzpatrick's entire life would turn. He was not originally cast as Telly. In fact, he was offered the role of Telly, and he turned it down, flatly. He read Harmony Korine's script and was, by his own account, repulsed by the character. He didn't want to be the virgin surgeon. He didn't want to say those lines. He didn't want to do those things. The character was a monster, a sociopath in skate shoes, and it hit too close to home. He knew kids like Telly, the predatory braggarts who moved through the park, and he didn't like them. He didn't want to be the public face of the worst, most toxic part of his own subculture. Instead, Leo wanted to play the sidekick, Casper. Casper was the more relatable, fun-loving, and ultimately tragic character. Casper was goofy. Casper was Telly's bumbling, less successful wingman. Casper was, in the end, a victim of his own ignorance, a character the audience could feel something for, even pity. That was a role Leo felt he could play. But Larry Clark was insistent. He was a photographer, an artist obsessed with the perfect, terrible beauty of youth, and he had an eye. He saw Telly and Leo. It's a chilling thought. What did he see? Perhaps it was precisely Leo's shyness, his almost angelic, unformed face that Clark found so compelling. The monster was so much more terrifying precisely because he looked like this. Not like a hardened criminal, but like your son, your neighbor, the boy from math class. There was a debate. For a while, the role of Telly was actually given to another kid, while Leo was set to play Casper. But things shifted, as they do in the chaos of pre-production. The other kid was out. Justin Pierce, with his own haunted energy, was given the role of Casper, a part he would inhabit with a tragic perfection that won him an Independent Spirit Award. And Leo was left. According to Fitzpatrick, Clark cornered him. He pressured him, cajoled him, and finally he convinced him. How do you convince a 15-year-old shy suburban kid to play one of the most depraved and despised characters in modern film history? You offer him an amount of money that is, to him, unimaginable. The pay was reportedly $1,000 a day. It is impossible to overstate what this sum meant in 1994. This was not for a 6-month studio shoot, but for a 20-odd-day shoot. This was a king's ransom. For a 15-year-old kid whose only income came from odd jobs or whatever money his parents gave him, this was more money than he had ever seen in his life. It was an amount that was simply impossible to refuse. It was a Faustian bargain, offered in a concrete park under a summer sky. Leo Fitzpatrick reluctantly, and with a deep sense of dread, agreed. He would be Telly. The shoot, which took place in the blazing, sticky summer of 1994, was unlike any other film production. It was, by all accounts, controlled chaos, or perhaps more accurately, uncontrolled chaos that was simply being filmed. Clark, as a first-time director, used his photographer's instincts. He wanted authenticity above all else. He was allergic to anything that felt acted. Kareen's script provided the skeleton, the day-in-the-life narrative structure. But the dialogue, the energy, the meandering, profane, and oddly poetic conversations about nothing and everything, many of those were improvised by the kids themselves. Clark would set up the 16mm camera, creating a grainy, voyeuristic documentary feel, and essentially let his cast be themselves, or at least the versions of themselves he had cast them to be. The film Kids was created with limited adult oversight in familiar city settings, like public streets and green spaces, purposefully merging fictional elements with real-life scenarios to achieve a raw, immersive sense of realism that felt intrusive and documentary-like. The adolescent protagonist,
embodying a role filled with intense interpersonal conflicts and boundary-pushing behaviors, encountered significant mental and emotional strain throughout production. Central moments featured simulated explorations of personal relationships and a forceful confrontation involving a vulnerable individual, all executed without essential support systems such as dedicated on-set professionals for sensitive scenes or psychological counseling. In navigating the most demanding sequence, the cast relied on substances to create emotional distance, reflecting the filmmaker's uncompromising style of portraying unvarnished societal decay, drawing parallels to his earlier creative works in visual media. Filming concluded in the summer of 1994, and the lead actor saw it as an odd, profitable temporary gig, anticipating it would soon disappear after niche showings. Contrary to expectations, the movie's debut at a major film festival in early 1995 triggered widespread upheaval. Audiences reacted with gasps, exits, and divided opinions, lauding it as a vital snapshot of youth culture or decrying it as manipulative sensationalism. This sparked intense acquisition competition, ultimately secured by a prominent independent film executives company. However, corporate ties to a family-oriented parent organization conflicted with the film's overt themes of underage misconduct and brutality, resulting in a restrictive rating that hindered distribution by limiting viewership and promotional avenues. To anyone else, this would be a disaster. To Harvey Weinstein, it was a marketing gift from heaven. In a move of what many saw as cynical brilliance, Weinstein created a new shell company, Shining Excalibur Films, just to release the film. This allowed him to bypass Disney's standards and, more importantly, to build the entire marketing narrative around the controversy. The film was no longer just a film. It was contraband. It was the film Disney didn't want you to see. The NC-17 rating, the banned status, the critical outcry. Weinstein weaponized all of it. He positioned Kids as the most dangerous, most important, most real film of the year. It wasn't entertainment. It was a wake-up call, a cultural emergency. When Kids was finally released in theaters in the summer of 1995, the marketing campaign was everywhere. And at the absolute center of it was Leo Fitzpatrick's face. That smirking, 17-year-old face was on posters in every major city, staring down from billboards and looking out from full-page ads in alternative weeklies. It was the face of the moral panic. The film critics were, as expected, completely torn. Janet Maslin of the New York Times called it a wake-up call to the world, a remorselessly gripping masterpiece. Roger Ebert, however, was deeply disturbed, questioning its purpose and authenticity. He wrote, "The film's visual style is so realistic that it is easy to mistake it for a documentary. But it is not. It is a fiction, and the kids are, in a sense, being exploited." The cultural debate was deafening. It transcended the film pages and exploded onto the op-ed pages and news broadcasts. Politicians like Senator Bob Dole, then running for president, attacked it as another example of Hollywood poisoning the nation's youth. It was the movie that parents were terrified to see, and that teenagers, fueled by the forbidden status, were desperate to. It was the perfect storm of art, commerce, and controversy. For Leo, who had just turned 17, his life changed overnight. And it was not for the better. He couldn't walk down the street. He couldn't skate in the park. His anonymity, the one thing he had always taken for granted, was shattered. And it was shattered in the worst possible way. People didn't see Leo Fitzpatrick, the actor who gave a compelling performance. The documentary style of the film, the improvised dialogue, and the casting of real-life kids had worked too well. People saw Telly. They believed, on a fundamental, visceral level, that he was that person. He was not an actor playing a part. He was, in the public imagination, a monster captured on film. The public reaction he faced was not fame in the way we understand it. It was a specific, toxic infamy. He became a magnet for the city's aggression and judgment. Men, and this, for him, was the most disturbing part, would approach him on the street. Some would even slap him on the back, congratulating him. They saw Telly as a hero, an icon of twisted masculinity. They admired his game. They would yell the character's disgusting, predatory lines at him, as if they were in on a shared joke. And then there was the other side. People, particularly women, would cross the street to avoid him, their faces hardening with pure, unadulterated hatred. He was spat on in Soho. He was threatened.
He got into physical fights in the East Village, not because he was aggressive, but because he was constantly being confronted by people, boyfriends, protective strangers, who saw his face and immediately saw a threat. He was 17 years old and had become the public face of everything society feared and despised about its youth: sociopathy, apathy, sexual violence, and the AIDS epidemic. He was horrified. He was shell-shocked, angry, and profoundly confused. He felt deeply that he had been betrayed. He felt exploited by Larry Clark. He had been a shy 15-year-old kid from New Jersey, paid a large sum of money to play a part he didn't even want. Now, his life was a living hell because he had done the job too well. He had no media training. He had no publicist. He had no studio support system to guide him through the firestorm. He was just a kid, alone navigating a level of global infamy that most seasoned actors never have to face. In a desperate, flailing attempt to reclaim his own identity, he began to publicly badmouth the film. In the few interviews he gave in 1995, he sounds exactly like what he was: a cornered, angry, and terrified teenager. He insisted it was just a movie. He said the dialogue was stupid. He said people were idiots for believing it was real. He tried with all his might to create distance between himself and the monster on the poster, but his protests were useless. The performance was too good. The film's documentary style was too effective. The narrative that this was real was too powerful. The more he protested, the more he just sounded like Telly trying to lie his way out of trouble. The boy named Leo Fitzpatrick was, for all intents and purposes, erased. Telly had taken his place. The monster was real, and now he had to live in the prison of that face, while the very world that had made him famous was about to consume his closest friends. Leo was trapped in his own personal nightmare, but he was not the only one. The fame that had poisoned his identity was a different, but no less lethal kind of poison for the other kids from the park. For them, the film's authenticity became a trap. It didn't launch them into a new, safe world. It cemented them in their old one, now with a lethal influx of access, expectations, and adoration. This became known in the hushed, sad tones of the downtown community as the curse of kids. For many, this wasn't just a media narrative. It felt like a real, unfolding, and fatal tragedy. The immediate aftermath of Kids was a strange, dark, and intoxicating time for its young, non-professional cast. They were famous, but it was a new, volatile, and toxic strain of fame. They weren't Hollywood celebrities, insulated by publicists and handlers. They were the kids' kids. They were subcultural icons, famous for being the authentic, raw, downtown outcasts the film had documented. This new status didn't lift them out of their world. It just made them kings of it. It gave them a permanent spot on every guest list, a free pass to every party, and an endless supply of free drinks and drugs. For a group of teenagers already teetering on the edge of self-destruction, this sudden, unmanageable influx of access and adoration was like pouring gasoline on a fire. This unwanted, unearned fame began to cleave their paths. For some, it was a launching pad, but only for those who already had one foot in another, more stable world. Chloe Sevigny, already a fashion world darling and Sassy magazine intern, deftly parlayed her it girl status into a career as a high fashion muse and eventually a celebrated Oscar-nominated actress. Her fame was rooted in her undeniable unique style and on-screen presence, something the fashion and art worlds valued independently of the film. Rosario Dawson, with her stunning, more traditional beauty and a clear-eyed intelligence, was able to navigate the system, avoid the downtown typecasting, and build a long, successful, and diverse Hollywood career. But for the boys at the film's core, the skaters whose entire identity was the park, the path was much darker. Their fame was rooted in their authentic street credibility, and it only served to amplify their most self-destructive tendencies. The two brightest lights of the male cast, besides Leo, were Harold Hunter and Justin Pierce. Harold Hunter was, by all accounts, the undisputed mayor of Washington Square Park. If you watch Kids, he's the one you remember with a smile. He was a phenomenal, groundbreaking skater with an infectious, gap-toothed laugh and a personality that was larger than life. He played a version of himself in the film, the wild, funny, chaotic life of the party. After the movie, he became a New York icon. He traveled the world as a professional skater for Zoo York, modeled for Tommy Hilfiger, and was a minor celebrity in the truest sense, a beloved, recognized face in the city he embodied. But he was also a partier. It was part of his charm, his energy. The fame brought more access, more demands on his personality, more drugs, more alcohol. The party, which had been his life, now became his job, and it was a job he couldn't clock out of. On February 11th, 2006, after his family and friends hadn't heard from him for several days, Harold Hunter was found dead in his Lower East Side apartment. The cause was a cocaine-induced heart attack. He was 31 years old. His death sent a shockwave of grief through the entire downtown scene. The king was dead. The story of Justin Pierce, who so brilliantly played Telly's bumbling sidekick Casper, is even more devastating. Pierce was not a stable kid, even by the standards of the park. He came from a chaotic home life, had been arrested for theft, and had spent time in juvenile detention, Skating was his only escape, the park his only real family. Kids was his first acting job, and he was a natural. He was brilliant in it, capturing a vulnerability and tragic ignorance that made him the film's secret heart. For his performance, he won the 1996 Independent Spirit Award for Best Debut Performance. Unlike many of the others, Justin tried to capitalize on this legitimate critical acclaim. He tried to become a professional actor. He moved to Los Angeles, got an agent, and landed a few more roles, most notably in the 2000 film Next Friday and the TV series Malcolm in the Middle. He married, had a child, and was, from the outside, attempting to build a normal life. But he was deeply troubled, struggling with severe depression and a long-standing drug problem. The demons that had haunted him in the park had simply followed him to Hollywood, where they were now amplified by the pressures of an industry he wasn't equipped to handle. On July 10, 2000, just 5 years after Kids was released, Justin Pierce was found by hotel security hanging in his room at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. He had taken his own life. He was 25 years old. Leo Fitzpatrick watched all of this. These weren't co-stars. These were his friends. These were the kids he skated with, the ones who had been plucked from the park with him, the ones who had shared this bizarre world-changing experience. He saw, in real time, the destructive, consuming power of this specific toxic fame. He, too, was struggling. He was living in the shadow of Telly, facing public hatred. He was drinking heavily. He was using drugs. He was caught up in the same scene that was killing his friends. He was lost, confused, and terrified. In later interviews, he would speak about this period with a profound, palpable sense of sadness and survivor's guilt. He admitted that he was on the exact same path. He said the fame was a dark cloud that hung over all of them, one that distorted their reality and fueled their worst impulses. And he pinpointed with chilling clarity the one thing that saved him: his escape route. When the New York scene became too much, when the character of Telly became too suffocating, he could get on a train. He could go home to Montclair, New Jersey. He could retreat to his stable middle-class family, a family that knew him as Leo, not Telly. He had a base, a foundation, a place to decompress and remember who he actually was. Justin and Harold didn't have that. The park was their home. The scene was their family. When the fame hit, they had no off switch, no place to retreat. They were trapped inside the very roles the film had celebrated them for. Leo Fitzpatrick, in a moment of profound, life-altering realization, understood this. He knew that if he hadn't had that family base in New Jersey, that place to escape the suffocating reality of the scene, he would have ended up dead, just like Justin or Harold. His identity had been poisoned by a monster. The world that had made him famous was now literally killing his friends. He was trapped. Leo Fitzpatrick knew he had to do something, anything, to escape. He couldn't just run from Telly. He had to actively kill him. He had to prove to the world, and more importantly to himself, that he was not the monster on the poster. His life depended on it. This realization was a stark, cold, and clarifying moment. He could not outrun Telly. He could not argue with him. He had to erase him. But how? He couldn't simply return to his old life. That life was gone and the park was a graveyard. He had to build a new identity using the only tool the monster had left him. If the world was going to insist on seeing him as an actor, he would become one, but on his own terms and with a singular, desperate mission. Leo Fitzpatrick was alive. This, by the turn of the new millennium, was no small feat. His friends, his skating partners, the boys who had been plucked from the concrete of Washington Square Park alongside him, were becoming ghosts. Justin Pierce was gone, a tragic 25-year-old headline in Las Vegas. Harold Hunter's long, slow decline, fueled by the very fame kids had granted him, was tragically underway. Leo was one of the last men standing, a survivor of a cultural shipwreck, left clinging to the wreckage of his own toxic infamy. He was at a crossroads that few people in public life ever have to face. His identity had been poisoned. The curse of kids was not a metaphor for him. It was a body count. He could either be consumed by it, fading into the same fog of addiction and depression that took his friends, or he could fight back. He could reclaim his name. But what weapon did he have? The world saw him as a monster, a one-note sociopath. The only tool at his disposal was the very thing that had created the monster in the first place: acting. His acting career for the next decade became a fascinating, methodical, and almost surgical study in deliberate counter-programming. This was not a pursuit of stardom in the way Rosario Dawson or Chloe Sevigny were experiencing it. He was not trying to become a leading man. He was not trying to be a heartthrob. He was trying to disappear. He was attempting a public exorcism, one role at a time. His goal was to bury Telly under such a pile of different faces, different voices, and different energies that the world would be forced to forget him. He didn't want to be the predator. He wanted to be the victim. He didn't want to be the charismatic monster. He wanted to be the pathetic loser, the quirky sidekick, the hopeless addict. He wanted to be anyone, absolutely anyone else. His first major and most shocking move was to return to the source of the trauma. In 2001, he appeared in Bully, the second feature film from director Larry Clark. This choice is, on its face, baffling. Why would he willingly reunite with the director he felt had exploited him, the man who had effectively stolen his identity for the sake of art? It's a question Leo himself has never fully answered, but one can speculate. Perhaps it was an attempt to reclaim the narrative, to step back into the ring with his tormentor, but this time as a willing participant, not a naive 15-year-old. Perhaps it was a calculated move, knowing that a second Clark film would get attention and give him the platform to show he was something different. Or perhaps it was simpler. It was a job, and it was a job that fit the new narrative he was trying to write. Bully was, once again, a shocking true crime story about a group of disaffected, amoral teenagers, this time in the humid, listless suburbs of Florida, who plot to murder their abusive, monstrous friend, Bobby Kent. Clark was doubling down on his central theme, youth as a void. But Fitzpatrick's role within that void was critical. He was not the monster. He was not the film's Telly. That role went to actor Nick Stahl, who played the victim, Bobby. Instead, Leo played Derek Zverko, a strange, peripheral, and ultimately pathetic follower. Think about this character as a direct antidote to Telly. Telly was an apex predator. He was an alpha. He moved with a sociopathic confidence, bending the world to his will, his friends his loyal, admiring subjects. Telly inflicted violence with a smirk. Derek in Bully is pure prey. He is a geeky, awkward, easily manipulated pawn. He's a stoner who just wants to get high and perform in his band. He is brought into the murder plot not through malice, but through a combination of peer pressure and sheer spineless weakness. His one significant act in the film is to procure a tranquilizer to drug the victim, and even that he does with a kind of baffled, nervous energy. He is, in the end, pathetic. It was a complete 180-degree turn from Telly's aggressive, predatory confidence. The film was again mired in controversy, but for those paying attention, it established a crucial fact. Leo Fitzpatrick was not a one-note actor. He was not Telly. He could be something else. He could be weak. This was the first crack in the facade. But the role that would truly, finally, and permanently kill Telly. The one that would become his definitive second act arrived in 2003. It was a role that, for an entirely new generation of viewers, would become his primary identity. He was cast in the second season of the HBO series, The Wire. It is impossible to overstate the cultural significance of this. In the early 2000s, HBO was not just a cable channel, it was the absolute zenith of creative, prestigious, and cinematic television. This was the golden age of The Sopranos, Oz, and 6 Feet Under. To be cast on an HBO show was to be anointed. It was a stamp of legitimacy that no independent film could offer. And The Wire, while not a ratings juggernaut at the time, was already being whispered about by critics as one of the most complex, ambitious, and important television shows ever made. Leo was cast in Season 2, which famously and controversially at the time shifted its focus from the inner-city drug cruise of Season 1 to the dying, desperate world of the white working-class dock workers at the Port of Baltimore. He was cast as Johnny Weeks. Let us hold this character up to Telly and watch the monster dissolve. Telly was a predator who inflicted pain. Johnny Weeks was pure prey, a creature who seemed to soak up all the pain the world could give him. Telly was a symbol of urban decay, but he was a master of it. He navigated the chaos with a hunter's confidence. Johnny Weeks was a victim of urban decay. He was a symbol of the collapsing white working class, a kid with no future, left behind by deindustrialization, with only the docks and eventually drugs. Telly was an isolated sociopath, using his friends as props for his own narrative. Johnny Weeks was introduced as part of a community. He was the bumbling, good-natured, and endlessly picked-on friend of Ziggy Sobotka, the nephew of the doomed union boss, Frank Sobotka. He was goofy. He was loyal. He was, in his own simple-minded way, sweet. His first major scene involves him and Ziggy arguing over who has to pay for drinks, a moment of such grounded, real, and harmless teenage energy that it immediately stood in stark contrast to Telly's predatory monologues. The character's arc is one of the most quietly heartbreaking subplots in the entire series. He is not evil. He is simply, tragically weak. He gets pulled into Ziggy's ill-fated smuggling schemes. When they stumble upon a cache of high-quality heroin from the Greek's international operation, Johnny, ever the follower, tries it. And just like that, he is hooked. His transformation over the course of the season is a revelation. We watch him go from a goofy kid trying to score free beers to a desperate, shivering addict. His skin goes sallow, his eyes sink. His loyalty shifts from his friend Ziggy to his next fix. In the end, he abandons the docks, his community, and his entire life, and ends up on the streets of West Baltimore, living in a vacant, boarded-up row house with the show's veteran addict, Bubbles. This relationship is key. He becomes Bubbles' apprentice in the grim life of a junk man, stealing scrap metal to feed their shared habit. Bubbles, himself one of television's most iconic tragic figures, becomes a kind of pained, frustrated mentor to him. This relationship showcased a profound vulnerability. Johnny was a follower. He needed someone, even if it was just to show him how to survive on the street. Telly used everyone. His story ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. In one of the season's final devastating moments, Bubbles returns to their squat to find Johnny unresponsive. He's overdosed. Bubbles, in a panic, tries to administer CPR, breathing into the mouth of the dead boy. It is useless. Johnny Weeks is gone. His death isn't shocking or violent in the way of kids. It is simply, profoundly, and pathetically sad. It is the quiet, grim, and lonely end that Telly's real-life counterparts, Justin and Harold, were already hurtling towards. For the new, prestige TV watching audience. This was their primary introduction to Leo Fitzpatrick. They didn't know the kid from Kids. They knew Johnny Weeks from The Wire, the heartbreaking addict who Bubbles tried to save. And for those who did remember Telly, the cognitive dissonance was staggering. The transformation was complete. It was a performance of such gentle, nuanced, and tragic humanity that it completely annihilated his original image. Leo Fitzpatrick had successfully used his fame to land a role on a prestigious show and then use that role to perform a public execution on the monster that had haunted him for a decade. Telly was dead. Johnny Weeks had killed him. After The Wire, Leo Fitzpatrick was something new. He was no longer a cultural bogeyman or a subcultural curse. He was simply a respected character actor. He worked steadily. He popped up in Carnival, another prestige HBO drama. He had a memorable, funny, and bizarre guest spot on My Name is Earl as a man who sincerely and pathetically believes he's a werewolf. He showed up in the gritty, popular cable drama Sons of Anarchy. With every new role, he buried Telly a little deeper. He was becoming that guy, the actor you instantly recognize, the one who always brings a unique, quirky, and undeniably authentic energy to the screen. He had survived the curse. He was now simply a working actor. But acting, it turned out, was never the real plan. It wasn't the destination. It was just the escape route. It was the long, difficult bridge he had to build to get from the nightmare of 1995 to the rest of his life. His true passion, the one he had before Larry Clark ever pointed a camera at him in the park, was calling him back. The decade-long grueling campaign to kill Telly through acting had been a success. Johnny Weeks had given him a new face, one that was human, tragic, and respected. But this new face, that of a working character actor, was also a mask, albeit a much more comfortable one. The escape was complete, but the journey wasn't over. Now, for the first time, he had the stability, the platform, and the freedom to stop running from something and start building towards what he had always truly been. Leo Fitzpatrick was never supposed to be an actor. This is the truth that gets lost in the noise of Kids, in the tragedy of the curse, and in the quiet triumph of his character acting career. The role of Telly was a fluke, a Faustian bargain made in a park for a pile of cash. The acting career that followed, culminating in his heartbreaking turn as Johnny Weeks in The Wire, was a brilliant decade-long act of self-defense. It was an escape, a calculated demolition of a false identity that had been forced upon him. But it was not and had never been the end goal. His true passion, the one that predated Larry Clark, the one that had drawn him from the suburbs of New Jersey to the concrete of Manhattan in the first place, was calling him back. Before he was Telly, before he was Johnny Weeks, Leo Fitzpatrick was a skater. And in the New York of the 80s and 90s, being a skater meant you were, by default, enmeshed in the art world. This cannot be overstated. This was not a celebrity vanity project, the kind where a famous actor suddenly decides to become a painter or start a band. This was a return to his roots, to his native language. The downtown scene he grew up in was a seamless, chaotic ecosystem where skaters, graffiti artists, musicians, fashion designers, and visual artists all drank at the same bars, partied in the same lofts, and collaborated on the same projects. The walls of the city were their gallery. Legends like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring had emerged directly from that same street-level, DIY, creative energy just a decade earlier. And in Leo's own generation, this energy was producing a new wave of art world stars, figures like Dash Snow, Ryan McGinley, and Dan Colin, who captured the same raw, hedonistic and ephemeral beauty that kids had, but in photography and sculpture. Leo was not an outsider to this world. He was a part of it. He knew these people. They were his friends, his peers. He understood this world in a way Hollywood, with its agents and red carpets, could never. Throughout the 2000s, even as his acting career was solidifying and he was gaining respect for his work on shows like The Wire and Carnival, he was quietly, seriously, and methodically building a parallel life in the New York art world. First, he began making his own art. His work was a natural extension of his skate and street culture background. It was often text-based, using found objects or taking the form of zines and small sculptures. It had the same raw, unpolished, and immediate aesthetic of the skate magazines and punk rock flyers he grew up with. It was personal, deeply ironic, and completely unpretentious. It wasn't grand art. It was art as a form of communication, a continuation of the same language he'd always spoken. He began showing his work in small group shows, earning his stripes not as Leo Fitzpatrick, the actor from Kids, but as Leo Fitzpatrick, the artist. This was a crucial distinction. He was building a new reputation from the ground up, in a world that was notoriously skeptical of celebrity interlopers. But because he was a genuine product of that scene, he was embraced. He was one of them. More importantly, he began to curate shows. This was a significant psychic shift. For his entire adult life, from the moment Larry Clark first pointed a camera at him, Leo had been the subject of art. He was the face in the photograph, the character in the film. He was the one being looked at, analyzed, judged, and interpreted. His face, his identity had been used by others to tell their stories. Now, by curating, he was becoming the one who framed the art. He was the one guiding the conversation, selecting the voices, and shaping the narrative. He was using his connections, his platform, and most importantly, his respected eye to promote other artists he believed in, many of whom were his friends and peers from that same downtown scene. He was moving from the passive position of being seen to the active position of showing. This culminated in 2012 when he joined Half Gallery as a partner and co-owner, a contemporary art space in the East Village. The location was poetic. It was just blocks away from Washington Square Park, blocks away from the squat where Rosario Dawson was discovered, blocks away from the streets and tenements where kids had been filmed. He was, in effect, planting his flag directly in the heart of the territory that had almost destroyed him. The name of the gallery was perfect, Half Gallery. The name had a double, or perhaps triple, meaning. On one level, it was a joke about the gallery's physical space, which was, at its inception, a tiny, almost comically small storefront. But on a deeper level, it spoke to his own dual identity, half actor, half artist. Or perhaps more poignantly, it was an acknowledgement that for so long, the public had only ever seen half of him, the dark, monstrous, fictional half. This gallery was, in a sense, the other half of the story, the real half. Half Gallery was not a hobby. It was a serious, ambitious, and incredibly well-curated venture, and it quickly became one of the most exciting and respected small galleries in New York, a must-see stop for serious collectors, critics, and museum curators. Fitzpatrick and his partners had an incredible eye for new talent. They gave early career-launching shows to artists who would go on to become global art world superstars, most notably Genevieve Figges, an Irish painter whose wonderfully grotesque, melting neo-rococo style became a sensation. They championed artists who fused high and low culture, showing work by established art world legends like Richard Prince, right alongside young, unknown street artists and photographers. The gallery was a resounding success. It was critically acclaimed. It was financially viable, expanding into larger spaces. And it was, unequivocally, 100% Leo's. This, more than any acting role, was the final definitive step in his transformation. This was not just a job, it was an act of creation, of ownership. He was no longer just a participant in the culture, he was a gatekeeper, a tastemaker. He was no longer the exploited kid, the subject of the photographer's gaze. He was the gallery owner, the man on the other side of the desk, the one who chose the art, who wrote the checks, who built the careers. He had taken the platform that kids had so reluctantly and painfully given him, the fame, the connections, the cultural capital, and used it to build a fortress of his own creation. He had built a life that was stable, respected, and, most importantly, entirely his. This new stable life extended, finally, into his personal world. For decades, his public identity had been inextricably tied to the chaotic, destructive, and predatory sexuality of Telly. He was the virgin surgeon, a symbol of adolescent pathology. It was a heavy, ugly shadow for any man to live under, especially when trying to form real relationships. This new, stable life extended finally into his personal world. In 2016, he and his partner, Chrissy Miller, a creative director and designer, herself a respected staple of the same downtown New York scene, had a child, a son named Otis. Then on March 3rd, 2018, Leo Fitzpatrick got married. He wed Miller, someone who understood his world, his history, and who he was in spite of Telly. The circle was now complete. The man who was once the world's most infamous teenager, the poster boy for youthful decay and parental failure, was now a father, a husband, a respected businessman, a pillar of the New York art world. He was in his 40s and he was, finally, just Leo. The fight was over. He had won. But what does it mean to win a fight like this? This personal victory, so quietly and deliberately achieved, stands in stark contrast to the loud, tragic, and ongoing debate over the film that started it all. To truly understand the magnitude of his survival, one must look back one last time at the wreckage, at the legacy of the film, the fate of his friends, and the profound final irony of a life built on the very foundation of its own near destruction. So what do we make of kids today, viewing it from this side of the millennium, more than 30 years after it first tore a hole in the cultural fabric? And what, in the end, do we make of Leo Fitzpatrick's complicated, painful, and deeply intertwined relationship with it? The film itself remains a deeply controversial, profoundly uncomfortable, and essential work. The furious debate that started in that Sundance theater in 1995 has never really ended, because the questions it poses are unanswerable. Was it art or was it exploitation? Was Larry Clark a brave, unflinching truth-teller, a documentarian who dared to show a world that polite society wanted to ignore? Or was he, as one critic memorably put it, a vampire, a man in his 50s feeding on the vulnerability, naivete, and authentic, unformed beauty of his young, non-professional actors? The answer most likely is that it was and is both. It is impossible to deny the film's raw, undeniable power. It is a document. It captured a time, a place, and a specific nihilistic attitude with a shocking, fly-on-the-wall intimacy that has never been, and likely could never be, replicated in our media-savvy age. It was a brutal, necessary, and effective alarm about the silent spread of AIDS and the profound apathy of a generation that felt it had no future. It changed the language of independent cinema. It launched the careers of its writer, Harmony Korine, and its two most resilient stars, Chloe Sevigny and Rosario Dawson. It was a landmark, But it is also impossible for many to ignore the cost, the human cost. The curse was not a marketing gimmick, it was a body count. The method Clark used to achieve his lauded authenticity is now heavily criticized for placing underage, untrained, and vulnerable kids in situations of extreme emotional, psychological, and sexual stress. Allegations have persisted that the set's environment blurred lines, with some cast members later stating they were drunk or high during key scenes, raising profound questions about whether drug and alcohol use was implicitly allowed to lower their inhibitions. And then, as the cast has described it, when the film was a wrap and the controversy began to rage, they were left to deal with the global toxic fallout largely on their own. The deaths of Justin Pierce and Harold Hunter cast a permanent tragic shadow over the film. They are not just sad footnotes, they are a haunting central part of its legacy. They are the grim reminder that the authenticity Clark was so desperate to capture on 16mm film had real-world fatal consequences. They were not characters, they were real boys, and the machine that celebrated them for their real-life chaos ultimately consumed them. And what about Leo, the boy who survived, the one who had to carry the face of the monster? For decades, he hated the film. He hated what it did to him. He hated what it did to his friends. He hated the word Telly. He hated the smirk. He spent his entire young adulthood trying to scrub that character from his identity, trying to run, to hide, to perform, to build anything that could stand between him and that poster. But time and his own hard-won, multifaceted success has brought a new and profound perspective. In recent interviews, Leo Fitzpatrick no longer sounds like the angry, shell-shocked 17-year-old lashing out at the film. He no longer sounds like the haunted 25-year-old fighting for his life and identity. He sounds like a man who has finally and completely made peace with the ghost in his past. He sounds philosophical. He sounds like a man who has walked through a fire and is now calmly examining the burns, understanding that their shape is what formed him. He now acknowledges with a clear-eyed irony that Kids, the very film he despised, the role that almost cost him his identity, is the singular reason for everything good in his life. It is the weird art house film that gave him his start. It gave him the money and the infamy he leveraged into a legitimate acting career. That acting career, specifically the prestige and stability he earned from The Wire, gave him the financial freedom and the time to pursue his real passion, art. His work as an artist and curator and the success of Half Gallery were all built on the connections, the platform, and the cultural capital that were a direct result of him being the kid from Kids. This is the ultimate central paradox of his entire story. He had to become the most hated kid in America to become the man he was always meant to be. The poison was, in the end, the source of the antidote. The curse was, for him, the foundation of the blessing. Today, Leo Fitzpatrick is in his mid-40s. He is still a father. He is still a husband. He still runs Half Gallery, which remains one of New York's most vital art spaces. He still acts popping up in interesting projects for directors he admires. His face no longer the smooth, unsettling mask of Telly, but a face that is weathered, kind, and interesting. It is a face that carries the weight of a life lived, not just a role played. His story is not the terrible, abrupt tragedy of Justin Pierce or Harold Hunter. It is not the meteoric, Oscar-nominated success story of Chloe Sevigny. His is a quieter, more complex, and perhaps more deeply human narrative. It is simply a story of survival. Leo Fitzpatrick was given a mask at 15, the grotesque, leering mask of Telly. It was a mask he never asked for, a mask that threatened to fused to his face, to consume him, to become who he was. He was typecast by the entire world as a monster, and he was forced to watch as his closest friends were devoured by the very lifestyle that Mask represented. But he fought back. He didn't fight with headlines or dramatic public breakdowns. He fought with patience. He fought with work. He fought with a quiet, stubborn, 30-year determination to build something real, something of his own. He slowly, painstakingly, and methodically built a new face, one of his own making, the face of a character actor, the face of an artist, the face of a curator, the face of a father. He didn't just escape the shadow, he outgrew it. He built a life so full, so stable, and so completely, authentically his that the 17-year-old monster on the poster finally, after 3 long decades, became what it should have been all along. Just a character in a movie, just someone else.